Hello everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our town hall session. My name is Jim Carr and I'm the president of the NAIA. This session isn't typically part of our fall meeting agenda, but this hasn't been a typical year. While COVID has impacted almost every aspect of our association, one of the unspoken challenges is that it limits our ability to connect with one another. Now, we've been trying hard to communicate with membership consistently through surveys, newsletters, and emails. Lots and lots of emails. But that can sometimes feel like a one-way street. This town hall is an opportunity for you, our members, to ask pressing questions or even just share what's on your mind. While I might not have all the answers, I'll do my very best to respond as transparently and completely as possible. Fortunately, Lori Thomas, the commissioner for the Heart of America Conference, has agreed to serve as moderator for the Q&A session. For those of you who don't know Lori, she served in many roles at the NAIA National Office, eventually becoming a senior vice president before taking on the role of commissioner in 2014. Lori is passionate about the NAIA and believes in asking the tough questions, and I have no doubt she will do so today. So with all that being said, let's get started. I'm going to begin with a short video to highlight what the NAIA has been doing over the last 6 months. After that, Lori will join me and we'll move right into the Q&A so we can answer as many questions as possible. Over 6 months ago, it was life as usual for the NAIA. We were in the middle of hosting winter championships, preparing for our national convention, and beginning the spring sports season.
We'll have plenty of basketball coming up here today on the NAIA.
But on March 11, COVID-19 brought everything to a halt.
We are seeing the dramatic fallout in the world of sports.
The NAIA is announcing all spring sports have been canceled for the remainder of the year.
Over the course of 24 hours, the NAIA went from managing possible crowd restrictions to canceling all remaining winter championships, as well as our national convention. 4 days later, spring championships were canceled. College students across the country were headed home, and online instruction was the new normal for the rest of the academic year.
Clearly a time in which we're facing a lot of dangers. Of course, there's the physical danger of COVID-19, but for a lot of us, there's also a fiscal danger. So there's no shortage of danger that we're all dealing with. These opportunities to continue to care for our students in ways that might be new for many of us who are used to the physical presence of our students on campus, ways to continue to serve them and continue to do what we do. And this is a time when we all need to come together and operate in new ways. And that's certainly been the case with the NAIA.
It's a hard pill to swallow, not being able to do these championships, but it's going to be for the greater good in the long run. It really is going to help prevent the spread of the virus.
It's sad that this happened, but our number one goal is our student athletes.
It quickly became clear that these decisions really weren't choices at all. Canceling sporting events was the only option we had at that time. And while heartbreaking for all of us involved in college athletics, no one bore the brunt more than our student athletes. Years of preparation and practice, one last shot at a national championship for many seniors. But at its most basic level, it took away the opportunity to do what they love most, compete. I'll speak for the national office when I say we were devastated, but I know it was even more so for our members on the front lines, ADs, coaches, trainers. College athletics is our livelihood, and all of a sudden it was gone.
All these presidents on there want their students to come back to campus too. We miss you guys even more than you miss us, trust me.
Appreciate everything everybody's doing in these challenging times.
If you're ready to restart athletics, we need to be ready.
The National Eligibility Committee led the effort for a one-year ACT, SAT exception, as well as not charging spring sport athletes with a season of competition. The NAC acted swiftly to reduce game minimums and allow grace for certain rules so competition could resume. It also became clear that navigating fall sports would be our biggest challenge yet. Many of our members wanted to find a way to make the season viable. So again, membership offered insight and ideas on how to make it happen. And though it looks different from previous fall seasons, teams are competing. To say it's been difficult is an understatement. COVID-19 has been the most significant hardship many of us have ever faced professionally. But when I look back on the last 6 months, I won't just remember the difficulties. I'll remember how membership rose to the challenge, prioritized our student athletes, empathized with peer institutions, and steered the NAIA based on autonomy for members and the greater good of our association. I wish nothing more than to be able to tell you this will all be over soon. Unfortunately, we can only speculate and we'll be back to business as usual. There are still more challenges ahead, difficulties we have yet to even consider. However, there's no one I'd rather have working next to me than you. Stay well and I hope to see you in person soon. Wow, what an incredible video. I have to give a shout out to our incredible marketing team who did a great job putting this video together. Thank you. Before we get started with the Q&A, I want to explain how the process will work. Over the last few weeks, we contacted membership groups asking for those who had questions to submit them ahead of time. Not surprisingly, we received quite a few responses. For the sake of time, we're going to prioritize answering the submitted questions first. However, you're welcome to enter a question via the chat function. If we can't get to it today, we will follow up with answers after the session is over. And with that, I turn it over to Lori to lead the Q&A.
Well, good morning, Jim.
Good morning, Lori.
Gosh, I want to say this is my first time in the new NAIA offices, and they're beautiful. So
it's good to have you. We don't get many visitors these days, so good to have you.
It's been a long time.
Yeah.
So it's this is my first time driving downtown, so I was like, dang, this is so nice. So glad to be able to be here with you. First of all, I want to say that I can probably speak on behalf of a lot of the commissioners and members of just thank you. Thank you for your leadership and to the staff, because we know it's been really, really tough on everyone. So I can only imagine when you are president of an association that has institutions all over the country that are under different circumstances. So I can only imagine.
Yeah, I mean, it's been tough for everybody around the country and around the world, and we're no different than that. But we've got a great team, as you know, and people pitching in, and I would include the membership as part of that team. I mean, you're part of the NAC and the CCA, and then I'm in meetings with the ADA and of course the Council of Presidents, and I just get the sense that people are wanting to do what's best for the NAIA and for our student athletes, and that's the lens they see. We have disagreements and people with difference of opinion, but I just think that shines through.
Yeah, no, I would say that's very, very true. And I want to say congratulations. I think you had your first business meeting for the fall that has ever happened before. Has that ever happened before in the NAIA?
Well, I've been here 22 years. Well, we used to have the convention during the fall.
Yes.
So we had it at that time, but we've never had it sort of out of sequence like that, and so and never done it virtually before.
Yeah.
So
I thought it went well and
yeah.
was very easy to, from my end, as a user. So
absolutely. Well, Amy
congrats
Stover
on
and
that.
crew just they've adapted quickly, and we're just trying to keep up with the times.
Okay, so we're here. It's town hall. I haven't, you and I met in 1998, so It's so great to be here with you. So members have had an opportunity to turn in questions for you. So I'm going to go through some of those, and we'll just have a good discussion. I will. I'll try at least. Let's start with the major actions and discussions that came out of the fall meetings. I would love to hear about name and image and likeness and how that affects members.
Yeah, I was just thrilled that the membership not only passed name, image, and likeness, but did so with about a 90% vote. So what that said to me is our members were wanting to put progress ahead of perfection. There's still lots of questions and things that we have to work through, but they put the importance to our student athletes of giving them the same opportunities that all students enjoy ahead of all that. So now that that's passed, our student athletes can go out and promote themselves as student athletes at a particular school or a particular program, to give sports lessons or to be social influencers, something that I don't know a whole lot about, but I know it's out there and essentially how it works. So I think it was the right thing to do. It's nice to be out ahead of others who haven't gotten to this point yet. And we got a lot of great publicity from Forbes, Sports Business Journal, University Business. So people are really taking note that the NAIA is out and leading, and that attributes to our membership for having that foresight and being able to get out in front.
That's great. What else would you highlight?
We, in addition to our first virtual meeting, we also instituted a new membership cycle. We now have 2 chances for new members to come into the NAIA. So back in the spring, our normal cycle, we had 5 new members come in. And then what we were hearing, especially from NCAA members who were interested in coming in, they they wanted a little bit more runway or a little more time to be able to promote themselves and go out and recruit new students as NAIA members. So they liked the idea of coming in the fall and then becoming members next July. And so we started that membership cycle and had 3 new members, 2 of which are coming over from the NCAA. So that was good to see and exciting. I also was pleased to see in the legislation, the Competitive Experience Committee had a proposal that would allow students to compete up to 20% of a season or allowable contest and not be charged a season of competition. And so I thought that was another student athlete friendly amendment. And I think it'll also help schools with retention, giving some kids who otherwise wouldn't be able to play in a single game now can play in up to 20% of the contest and still maintain the 4 seasons or how many ever they have left. So that was nice. And then just as no surprise to anybody, lots of discussions around COVID and the different things. And we've been making really good progress, but to really have a focused amount of time with all of our leadership groups helped to advance those things. And my guess is we'll get a few questions about that. So we'll talk a little more about that down the road, I'm sure.
Well, so one of the questions here is I know that the NAIA is concluding their 5-year strategic plan, or you're in your last year.
That's right.
So I think we all know that going through a new process is time consuming. And so can you talk a little bit about where we are and maybe what we can expect in the new plan?
Yeah, Lynn Parman, who I say is our new COO, she's been here about a year, but Lynn has a lot of great experience with strategic planning and strategic alignment. So she's leading us through that process, and we've gone out with surveys. I'm sure our membership gets a lot of surveys from us, but we got some great response from all constituent groups. And really the short of it is people support our 3 current strategic priorities, which are membership, return on athletics, and improving or increasing non-dues revenue. And so they want us to continue with those. The good news is we're making a lot of progress with each of those. I already talked about membership, but people know about return on athletics and really the importance not only of what it's doing for our members currently, but as we think about coming out of COVID, it's going to be a great tool for people to utilize. And then non-dues revenue is important to advance all the different things we want to do, including what looks like is going to be a 4th pillar now, and that's around student athlete development. We've been doing some really neat things with the ASA and the CSA, and that's all come about even though it wasn't called out in our previous plan or in the current plan that we're finishing up. But I think most people are saying it's time to make that a focal point of the strategic plan. And then the last thing that is emerging, and probably no surprise to anyone given the environment and what's going on, and that is making sure that diversity, equity, inclusion are throughout the plan. I don't know exactly how it's going to become a part of it, but we want to make sure that that's something that NAIA members know that we're paying attention to and that we need to do a better job of.
Yeah, very good. So you talked about return on athletics. So the question is, it's a great tool for those looking at the financial impact of athletics on a campus, and it is important. How do we balance the need for generating a return with making sure we encourage members to provide the resources needed to support our student athletes?
Yeah, it's a great question. First, for the person that sent that in, appreciate the kind words about return on athletics. I do want to say at first that it really is catching the attention of leaders on member campuses, but also prospective members. Of the 8 new members that I mentioned before, most of them have pointed towards return on athletics. They've pointed towards character-driven athletics and the ways, the reasonable cost to participate in the NAIA. But return on athletics has been kind of a focal point of them wanting to be a part of our association. So I think it's doing a lot of the things we had hoped it would do. I think there's room for a great balance of helping institutions understand the business side of things, but also making sure that student athletes get the return that they're looking for in an athletics program. And we have metrics throughout ROA that help measure that. Retention, for example, is one of the key things we measure, and you can't retain students at a high rate unless they're pretty satisfied with the experience and the kinds of support and services they're getting at the institution. So I think that will continue to be called out and continue to be a part of it. And for me, I believe too that we're not really trying to say to people, you have to go through and just cut a bunch of costs in order to make athletics work from a business perspective, but you need to think carefully about the kinds of things you're investing in. And so investing in our student athletes certainly would be at the top of that list.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. You mentioned briefly, and we'll go ahead and turn towards an important topic that is on the top of minds right now, I think, within our membership, and I know it is for me as a commissioner. What will the NAIA do to ensure diversity in some of the national leadership positions?
Yeah, and as you mentioned, I know as part of the CCA, platform or the initiatives you guys are looking at. RISE is what you're calling as part of it. So I want to get you in a second to talk a little bit about that. But as I mentioned before, we want to make it part of the strategic plan. I think one of the challenges in any association, especially as you're thinking about leadership groups and trying to have better diversity and inclusion within those groups, is you're somewhat limited by the pool, by the makeup of your member institutions. So I think there are a few different levels where we can help. One is to help our members try to become more diversified and with their staff, administrators, coaches, all those kinds of things. So then we have more people who can come into the leadership groups. But having said that, there's some things we can do in the short term and make sure that we're using at-large positions, for example, to create gender and racial balance and try to improve those things. And we have some mechanisms in place that I think, if we're honest with ourselves, we're probably not using to the extent that we can. So I think we'd start there, but then also talk with our leadership groups. We have a lot of terrific HBCUs, for example, that can bring a lot of thoughts and ideas to the table and help us figure out how to implement it. I know I sat in on a session that Jason Horn and Xavier was leading on this topic, and Kiki is also very active at Dillard. And so using those people as resources along with their presidents and others, I think is great. And it's not only diversity in terms of race, but gender. I think we're probably doing a little bit better on the gender side than we are otherwise, but those are some of the things that come to mind. But talk a little bit about RISE and what's going on there.
Yeah, we put together a task force in the CCA, and what we wanted, it started out, 6 months ago or a year ago about, gender equality, and then as you can tell, what has happened really in our society is it needs to be bigger than that. Yeah. And so we got a small group together, really just in casual conversation about what can we do? Here we are, we have 21, conferences all over the country. And so we felt that we could do something, maybe conference commissioners at least could try to at least educate. I know I need to be educated. Right. I am learning so much already that it made me realize that I think there's just so much education that we can help with, number one, to have a better understanding of what the issues are. And so RISE stands for Respect, Inclusivity, Support, and Education. And I think we're just wanting to give an opportunity within the NAIA structure, to be able to have those platforms and opportunities for education and engagement. Right. And so that's exciting. I think the Association of Student Athletes, they're wanting to be part of this. And so the NAIA, first in history, really for championships for women and African Americans. And so this is just another thing that we could really put a stamp on. Yeah, well said. And I think we're all well-intentioned. Now it's time to put some action behind that and make some progress. So continuing on that, in these times of issues with diversity, student-athlete health and wellness, Title IX, student-athlete experience, and as we grow membership and look to strengthen the association and its members, is it time to begin making recommendations or requirements for the staffing positions? Yeah, it's I think there are pluses and minuses to both sides of this. So we certainly could make some decisions to require schools to have certain positions or to hire certain people. The NAIA has typically been about and erred on the side of autonomy and flexibility to institutions and conferences and allowed them to make those kinds of decisions. So for me, and where I think the membership is right now, working through things like RISE and some other initiatives we can come up with, it's probably more about recommendations at this point and trying to encourage people to do certain things. We may get to the place where we want to require a position or a certain, maybe, here at the NAIA National Office, we could certainly have some internships and other positions maybe that would be minority focused. So I think it's a combination of the two, but probably in keeping with more of the NAIA way, as we've called it before, we'd want to give autonomy to people to do it as they see fit. And if I remember correctly, the NAIA, when I was here at the national office, we went to full-time commissioners not connected to a school. There has been just, I think, amazing, what word do I want to use? Let me do that again. So at a time, I think the NAIA had put in sort of a requirement that you had to have a full-time commissioner. And I think it's just huge strides as to the leadership. Yep. And one thing that I remember is I thought the NAIA gave a lot of time, just to be able to transition into that. while also, I think, understanding the flexibility and autonomy.
Yeah, that's a good point. And we, in addition to full-time commissioners, we also required the conference COP to meet once a year and to be in charge of certain areas. And there was some angst in that. People don't like you telling them what to do. And but I do think that if you look back 6, 7, 8 years ago, where our conferences were in general, we've certainly always had great commissioners and we've had great conferences, but across the board, it would be hard to argue any different than we made tremendous progress.
I agree. Yep. So let's turn to the hot topic on everyone's mind. There's lots of questions related to COVID. Most of the questions from membership are related to sort of how you're handling at the national office COVID issues. So let's talk about why didn't the NAIA wait longer and see how the fall season goes before making decisions about the winter season?
Yeah, so I guess maybe to begin with sort of two things that come to mind that'll probably be a part of answers to various questions around COVID is one, I don't think it's just in the NAIA, but people in general are looking for definitive answers on things when we're really in a time when there's not much definitive because of just all the unknowns around COVID. We don't know, what it's going to look like next month or in 2021 or what have you. So we're trying to figure out definitive answers in a challenging environment. And then there are lots of different opinions on sort of the balance of, well, tell us way in advance so that we can plan. So national office tell us, so conferences, schools, different coaches groups, so they can plan and develop what they want to do. And then you have others who say, well, wouldn't it be better to wait with championships, for example, till as close as possible to championships so you have the best data available.
Yes.
So we're trying to strike a balance of those two things. And so to your question around winter championships, we did wait until we at least got the fall up and running. And what we're saying now is, we don't have anything that we see right now that tells us that we can't run our championships in March, essentially, for winter. So we're telling the membership as of September 21st, and I think safe to say as of today, we are moving forward with our calendar as it was originally set. But, I always hesitate to say it this way because people are going to think we're in the midst of changing things. But if we get to January and things are falling apart, we probably won't be able to keep the calendar. But as you know, as a conference commissioner, the back end of that calendar is already getting awfully crowded. And so it's not just the national office, but if we're running all of our championships from March to May, you can only imagine what that does to the conference calendar, what it does to every day on campus when you're running all those sports at the same time. So our preference is definitely to keep the calendar as it is, but we'll adjust if we need to.
I look at it, and if you think of our industry, we're with coaches. Coaches are not, they're more black and white and want a schedule and need to know what's going to happen this weekend. I deal with that as a commissioner, and I keep telling everyone that this is the year that you have to understand to be flexible. It's going to change. Right. Sometimes we're going day by day.
Exactly.
And you're going to probably be facing that same thing.
I think another thing with coaches, which is also hard for them, is the competitive equity or trying to balance or level the playing field. I think you and I have talked about this. There's no such thing as a completely level playing field, but our job year in and year out is to try to make it as balanced as possible. But in this year, student athlete safety, the importance of sports to institutions and to people, those things to me take precedence over being exactly even or something's not fair with. But that's not the world coaches live in. They want it to be as fair as possible.
I would say that even our presidents, they understand. They're in the big picture. They're saying academics has got to be our primary, and whatever happens in athletics, we'll just be grateful if we can play. And I think we're trying to get everyone to kind of think in that way.
I agree.
Why did you change the original guidelines about testing?
Yeah, testing's been one of the tough decisions among many, partly because the technology and the availability of testing has changed so rapidly. I think back when in May, June, July, when we were really thinking about testing for the fall, the PCR tests were really the only test that people were saying were reliable. Now the antigen, the rapid test as of today are almost as reliable as the PCR test. But so when we were thinking about it for the fall, our thought was, when schools come back, and we were at the time thinking that most of our schools were going to try to start fall sports, we needed to at least test once right before competition to get an understanding of overall in the NAIA, how are things, and then also at least give a little bit of assurance, at least at that point in time when you're going to play an opponent, what do you know about that opponent? Well, when we decided to move the fall championships back into the spring part of the calendar. And we also knew that roughly half of our schools were going to start in the fall, but the other half weren't. Some of those reasons for the mandatory tests at least weren't as compelling. They may have still been there, but not as compelling. When you add to that we were getting a lot of pushback from people around the country saying either testing's not available in my part of the country, or my state government saying you can't, even if you bring them in from out of state, we're not going to allow you to test your student athletes because other people in the population need the test worse than they do. There's also, just reliability of getting them back in time. Mm-hmm. We had partnered with a company called Precision Genetics to try to handle some of that. But anyway, there were a lot of complications, and so when the reasons to do it weren't quite as compelling, we decided to go away with it. And I think that was a fairly popular decision with our membership to let, again, autonomy and flexibility to schools.
And so where's the NAIA? We have the question, could the NAIA work with a lab to provide testing for schools at a reduced rate by buying testing in bulk?
Yeah, and since it doesn't appear that we're going to have a mandatory testing requirement, that becomes more challenging because we really can't promise anyone a certain number of tests, a company. Mm-hmm. We are starting to talk again with some companies about at least making it known that they can provide some of this test. But with the new technology around antigen and rapid tests, it seems like those are available pretty widely. And we're partnering with USCAH and Jim Borchers, who's been really instrumental in getting the Big Ten back up and running. And he indicates that by after the first of the year that those tests should be pretty widely available. So our current plan is not calling for us to partner with a particular company, but if that we're open to that if it would help.
So there's a question related to championships. And so I sit here and I'm, of course, I think through the lens of my conference, that they would be heading to a championship, and you have somebody, coming from all over the country, and then we're going to put them together. How is the NAI thinking about the possibility of testing at championships?
Yeah, we still need to work through this with NAC, with the COP, and so at this point, this is my viewpoint of it and kind of how we're thinking about it as a staff. I believe that we need to have testing as part of our championships, and that's just like when the NCAA sent out their new standards around basketball. They haven't said anything yet about how they're going to test championships, at least to my knowledge, but they're saying that all of what they're saying around basketball regular season is dependent upon these new tests being widely available. So assuming that that's true, I think we'll want to have testing available and probably test students multiple times throughout the championship to make sure that, as you said, when people are coming in from all over the country and they're competing outside of their conference, I think most people are competing within conference only, they need some assurances that they're competing against folks who are not. I think the one challenge we're hearing about that is, well, if my student athletes aren't being tested all year and now they go to the championship and they get tested and they're out, is that fair? But to me, the flip side of that is if they're carrying the COVID virus, we'd want to know that and keep them out of competition. So there are no definitive answers, but we're working hard right now to see what our options are. And we've set aside some money in the budget to be able to pay for that. My preference would be not to ask the members to shoulder that.
That makes sense. So I'm going to ask you a tough question because I think about this all the time, and it is, what happens if a team has to quarantine during the week of the conference tournament or championship?
Yeah, during the regular season, there's a lot of flexibility in that, or at least there can be, not always. But if you can reschedule, you can postpone. But if you get to a conference championship, I won't speak for any particular conference commissioner because it'll be a conference decision. But I think it's pretty similar to what happened in a national championship. I mean, the length of the whole championship is less than 2 weeks, usually less than 10 days. And so if somebody has to quarantine, unfortunately, I think the answer is they're just removed from the championship, because I think it'll just basically mean that just like you would treat a team if they all got injured or something happened. It's sad. I don't like the answer to that, but I don't really see any other logistical way to handle it.
It's tough, because we're doing that right now. There are teams that have to quarantine, and it's not fun. Nobody likes it, but it is, you have to, and it's for the safety of all student athletes and coaches. Let's see here. With a probable high demand on officials this spring, I keep hearing this myself. Does the NAIA have anything in place to help leagues and schools find officials? I can't wait to hear this one.
Yeah, a few things. I guess first of all, at least the officials are getting a little love. Everybody wants them now, and usually that's not the case.
That's true.
They always want them, but they aren't always happy with them. I just checked in with Bob Lade recently, and I know it was a discussion point at the conference commissioners meeting. The good news is so far we haven't really run into that problem, but I also don't want to be naive. Part of that is because only half our schools are competing, and a lot of NCAA schools aren't competing, so the demand is not there the way it normally is. So when we fast forward to the spring, the demand's going to be higher, and some officials officiate more than one sport. They're going to be on top of each other. So we are working hard to try to figure out how to help with that. I know having our system with Arbiter and the officials registering with us gives us a lot better connection to officials. So Bob Lade can help conference assigners to understand who else might be out there and some of those things. And I know he's talking actively weekly with assigners of the Heart of America and all other conferences. So we're working at it. I wish we had the silver bullet and the answer, but I think we're just going to have to continue to work hard together to try to make it work.
Yeah. Has the NAIA given any consideration to not charging a season of competition to current student athletes for 2021 school year?
Yeah, I mean that was one of the things that was on the table, just as a reminder for those who may not have paid attention to it yet. The 1 year rule, the rule we put in place for this year, is that student athletes can compete up to 50% of their allowable contests and not be charged a season. And so they have that flexibility already in place, but we know that we're already finding out that it's kind of, there's a lot of unknown around, well, what are student athletes going to do when they start bumping up against that 50%? And originally, going back to your question, there was some talk about, well, let's just not charge anybody a season. We already had the spring sport athletes from last year that didn't get charged a season. So at some point, just students are going to need to play unless they want to stay in college for seven or 8 years. So right now, that 50% rule is the one that's in place. I don't know that adjusting it to a different percentage would really be all that helpful. And if there is some momentum among the membership to want to consider going back to the idea of not charging anybody, my view is we probably should do it pretty quickly, because people are making decisions based on the current rule. Most people agree the 50% rule is not perfect. There are some things that are going to cause student athletes to make decisions, or maybe have complexities and difficulties for schools, but at least it does give some leniency or ways in which students can I guess not burn a season if they don't want to.
Sure. Okay, due to the strong likelihood of quarantining policies due to contact tracing affecting a team multiple times throughout the year, is there a way to increase the scholarship threshold in the chance that a team would have to activate their junior varsity and reserve team players?
Yeah, I mean, this reminds me a little bit of the previous question. A lot of different ideas around this, lots of different thoughts. The good news is the COP in the last year relaxed our financial aid rules so that student athletes now don't count towards the team limit until they've played 20%. So it's a little bit different than the 20% rule that was just passed. That's more of that's about charging a student a season of competition. But the 20% rule that was passed by the COP recently gives a little more flexibility for the team limits. So a football player can play in a couple of games and still not count towards it, where the previous rule was one play or one game, and that student athlete's financial aid counts towards the limit. So there's already a little bit of flexibility built in. We took the issue or the topic to the Council President's Executive Committee, and their thought was, let's let things play out a little bit more and see how things are being impacted. There's one rule that I think a lot of people aren't really aware of, and that is, outside of COVID, in normal times, if a student athlete has a season-ending injury, the school can replace that student and not count the replacement player's aid. And so the question kind of becomes, what do you do with COVID? I mean, it's typically not a season-ending type of a deal, but there might be some ways to adapt that rule. That's not, as far as I know, currently on the table, but there are things like that we're thinking about.
That makes sense. Okay, next question in here. How will the NAIA direct the NAIA National Tournament Selection Committees to deal with teams who will have played in the fall while others will be playing in that spring? What about comparing teams that have played close to a full schedules with others that have played close to the minimum? This is a tough one.
And as you know, ratings and
Yep.
and selection and qualification for championships, one of my favorite topics, because
Yes.
I'm convinced that as much as we've worked on it, as much as we'll continue to work on it, people are going to be upset when their team doesn't get in and they think they should be in over
Yes.
another team, no matter how objective you try to make it or how good the process is. So I guess my point is, even in non-COVID times, there's still challenges and
never
difference
right.
of opinion. It's never right, especially for team, the last team out
Right.
in the
Yes.
championship. But having said all that, the good news is through a lot of that work that I just alluded to, we do have much more sophisticated processes in place. And in most sports, we've gone to selection committees.
Mm-hmm.
There is this, this vision that people have of like what used to be a smoke-filled room back in the days when people smoked.
Yes.
Or at least behind closed doors, people are making these decisions, so it's not all that transparent. I think we've tried to do it in a way where it is, I think at times, more transparent than the rating system, and that the selection committees are willing to talk with the teams that didn't make it and explain to them why. And so we have that better system in place, but I think their job's going to be tougher than ever this year, because I do think, a basketball team that's played 15 games, hopefully that we won't have very many of those, but you could have a team that's played just over the minimum and a team that's played almost a full schedule, and you have to figure that out. One of the good things is more than half of our qualifiers and all of our championships come through direct qualification from conferences. So, the conferences can figure out a pretty good schedule and a process to get those folks in. It's the other 30 or 40% that are going to be tough.
So you brought up ratings. I've been in the thick of it in ratings myself. So how do you, I know there was even yesterday, the National Administrative Council approved a rating, the rating calendar.
Right.
And, it's, once again, I don't think everyone's going to be happy with it because
I heard rumor maybe you're not completely happy.
I'll be one of them. I got to stand up for my coaches. So it is difficult that, the Heart of America made the choice, and I think a courageous one, to play.
Yep.
We were going to just play, and we were going to see how everything goes. We're very pleased that we're doing that obviously we're limping through. Yep. But that affects that the NAIA moved championships to the spring, so then the ratings calendar had to be changed.
Right.
So just what would you want to say to the members regarding, and the coaches, about ratings and, being spread out all over the year?
Yeah, I think, again, it's tough. I mean, so you think about, I'll just take football. I think, I may have these numbers a little bit wrong, but I think roughly 45 of the 95 football programs are trying to play in the fall,
Sure.
half the conferences basically. And so I see both sides of it. So if you're a football playing institution in the fall, but your first rating is not till after the first of the year, you're saying, well, we get basically no recognition while we're playing, and then they have to try to look back at what we did in the fall as schools are starting to play in the spring. So I see that part. But if you start to rate in the fall with more than half your teams not even playing a game, how do you rate those teams that are 0-0, or do you not? So it's a challenge, and I think what the NAC tried to do, and you can correct me if I'm wrong because you're more in it than I am, but was to kind of get input from coaches, because we didn't treat every sport the same. They're doing it differently, and then try to make a call based on the recommendation from the coaches. And so I know, if I'm right, I think football is the only one that doesn't have any rating before the end of the year, during the fall. And so I think that probably for football playing conferences, that's a tough one.
Yeah. Ratings. All right, I'll just keep going. We have another question here, and we have athletes in their home country who are unable to return to the United States in fall, even this fall or next spring, because our classes will remain online all year. Will they lose their term of attendance if they remain enrolled with the member institution?
Yeah, so sometimes I forget that people maybe not understand the nuances of the different rules. So let me just kind of give a little bit of context to that. So each student athlete has essentially 10 terms of attendance, or 10 semesters at most schools, to play 4 seasons. So the terms of attendance become a problem. So in the spring, those student athletes didn't get charged a season of competition, but they were all in school, and so they were burning one of the 10 semesters. And so what we decided in the spring was that spring term of attendance would not be counted in terms of the limit of 10. And so now we've already said that same thing for the fall. We're not charging student athletes the term
Yeah.
for in relation to the limits. I say it in that way because there are other places in terms of attendance come into play in
Right.
terms of number of hours passed and progress rule, those kind of things. So it still applies for that. But I think the National Eligibility Committee is basically saying if we're giving students more seasons, how just crazy and sad would that be to say, well, you have another season to play, but sorry, you used up all your terms.
Right.
And so the evidence so far is that we're not going to do that. This is particular questions about international students, but I think unless there's something I'm missing, that shouldn't really be any different than a domestic student who's taking courses online
Sure.
and not playing either. So I think up to now they're pretty well covered. The National Eligibility Committee will pretty soon be taking up what do we do about the winter and the spring term in with the same question. But unless something weird were to happen, they've been pretty lenient so far and not wanting to. It's sort of been termed by Arvid Johnson, the COP chair, that do no harm kind of a principle,
Sure.
especially when it comes to student
Sure.
athletes. And we can't say that's 100%. Some rules might have to stay in place, but for the most part, that's what we're trying to do, and I think it will continue on with terms of attendance.
Well, I have one more question here, and then I'm just going to ask you some personal questions.
Fire away.
So the last one, and how should we address the concerns of the student athletes who feel we do not care about their safety and well-being since we are allowing sports to continue?
I can see that in a certain respect, but I hope this comes out in the right way. I mean, no student athlete has to play. I have kids. Yeah. My daughter's a freshman in college. She doesn't play a sport, but she does other activities, and so she and we have the choice about whether she does that. We had a choice about whether she actually went to school.
Sure.
And so I think all parents and student athletes have to take their own safety first, and then if they're given the opportunity, they can decide whether they want to play or not. So I think, like the Heart of America, I think you guys made the choice. You thought it was safe, and you want to give these students the opportunity, but you're not forcing anyone. And to my
Correct.
knowledge, our schools are continuing to give aid even if a student says, I don't feel it's safe. So I think
one of the things, I've had a parent call me, even as a conference commissioner. We felt like when we made the decision to play, we felt that student athletes were in a better place if they were in a controlled environment.
Right.
Instead of just having freedom, because the issues are around sort of social
Right.
decisions, and so that's where we came to that decision, was that they were better off. And I will tell you, our presidents, we've had student athletes go to presidents. I've heard several stories about just being so grateful to be able to play.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I'm getting the word. We just have a couple of minutes left, so we may have to go rapid fire on
Okay.
these last
Oh my
few
gosh,
questions.
I could do rapid fire. Okay, first question. Have any siblings?
Yeah, my brother. We're Irish
have one?
twins. He's 11 months older. than I am.
Oh, very good. Where were you born and raised?
Gulfport, Mississippi. All born there, all 18 years through high school.
Very good. What did you do before NAIA?
Just immediately before, I was practicing law in Birmingham, Alabama. I'd worked in college athletics, UNLV and UMass before that.
Very good. And favorite fast food restaurant?
Oh.
You got to admit to one.
Yeah, I know. I really like Chick-fil-A.
So what's your favorite meal, breakfast, lunch, or dinner?
I'll go dinner. I just like end of the day, relaxing, having dinner.
So I would ask you, what do you do in your free time? So when I'm saying escape NAIA, escape COVID, what do you want to do?
Yeah, well, in our household, we've been pretty strict about, just trying not to take any risks and chances. Mm-hmm. So golf has kind of been my savior. It's pretty safe. I don't like the guys I play with that much anyway, so I keep a distance from them. No, I play with a good group of guys, and we all just keep our distance, and so that's been my main one. I love to play basketball and travel and go to games and do all those kinds of things, but that's just not available for me anyway during COVID.
That's very true.
Yeah.
Final question. What is ahead for the NAIA? Where do you see the association in 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, it's a great question. I could talk for a long time about that, but in the 30 seconds or so we have left, I just feel like we're in a really good spot. I mean, it's sometimes hard to pick your head up above COVID and sort of think about what it looks like beyond that, but we did a lot of that during the fall meetings, and 8 new members coming in this year, and dozens who are interested in coming in. I don't want to pick on our friends in Indianapolis, but they've got their own set of challenges, and I think the Division II and Division III schools are kind of seeing that maybe they're not really even thinking a whole lot about them and how they can serve them and what's best for them. And so presents us with a really great opportunity to continue to provide better service, continue to build up our resources, continue to pay attention to student athletes and their needs, and then really stress return on athletics and how schools can come into the NAIA and compete in a way that drives the bottom line, helps with enrollment and student success. And so going to keep moving forward with that, and I think it puts us in a good spot.
Very good. Well, I've been in the NAIA for 23 years now. I know, same as you. But I just want you to know, just really proud to be part of the NAIA and what all of you and the association stands for. So thank you for having me today, and
thanks,
so
Laura.
glad to be here with you again.
Thank you, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say the membership is the NAIA. So when I talk about all those things moving forward, it's because of the great membership and the commitment that all of you make. So thank you for that. It's been a great session.
Very good. Thanks.